yesterday, Boris Johnson on the steps of Number 10 saying he didn't want a general election. Nobody wants a general election. And I don't think anybody believed him. Is there going to be a general election?
I hope not. We don't want one. What we want to do is get the country motoring forward. We've got a spending review this week. We're talking today about training and development for nurses. We've got a Queen's speech slated for the 14th of October, a new legislative agenda, and we're making good progress with these EU negotiations.
OK, so it's in your power to say there isn't going to be a general election, but there's likely to be one, isn't there, because you face this threat of no-deal Brexit being ruled out by law by rebels within your own party and Remainers in Parliament?
What I was going to come on to say is that we're making good progress with the EU negotiations. And the one thing that has helped focus minds in the EU is the fact that we're leaving come what may, and we've got a very focused ask for what a good deal would look like. But the lingering doubt they've got is, will the shenanigans in Parliament somehow lead to the cancellation or the delay of Brexit? And that's encouraging them and weakening our position to actually get the deal that I think we all want. So I think this legislation, if you look at the terms of it, maybe we can come on and look at what it actually says, will be deeply irresponsible, but mainly because it would undermine, weaken our chances at this pivotal moment of getting a good deal that could pass through the House of Commons.
And the big debate here, Foreign Secretary, is about democracy, right? This
Absolutely
is the big debate. And I've been very consistent that I voted Remain, but believe that democracy in this country actually depends on us delivering on Brexit. Otherwise, why would anyone vote for anything ever again? One of the more worrying aspects of the government's behaviour in the last few days has been an apparent suggestion, started by Michael Gove, and others have hinted the same, that if you don't like the legislation that comes from Parliament, if you lose this vote, you don't like what they've put forward, that somehow the government might reserve the right to reject it, which, to me, would be absolutely unacceptable. That would be a breach of democracy in this country, right up there with not honouring a referendum. Can you give us, as Foreign Secretary, an undertaking that the government will accept parliamentary legislation?
We'll always behave lawfully, but we've been very clear that we will not extend beyond the October deadline for all the reasons, Piers, that you just articulated. And let's have a look at that legislation. Would you vote for a bill? Would you accept a bill which would create paralysing uncertainty by multiple potential extensions that would mean that the UK government would have to accept EU conditions for an extension, however harsh, however punitive?
OK, but if it's passed by Parliament, you would have to, under rule of law.
You also appear to be hinting then that if you don't like, if you lose, and that is the will of Parliament, and by the way, you know, to play devil's advocate on the other side, part of the point of Brexit was returning sovereign power to this country, of which the pillar is Parliament. If Parliament passes a bill and you lose that vote, and that is the will of Parliament, are you suggesting as Foreign Secretary then that you too would not necessarily accept it?
I'd always behave lawfully, that's clear.
That's a different question.
Yeah, no,
would you accept it?
No, absolutely. Look, we cannot delay any more for all the reasons you articulated. By the way, every day of that extension will cost your viewers and the taxpayer £1 billion each day. And the reality
so even if democratically elected MPs in a majority backed that legislation and it is passed through Parliament and becomes law, the government, on a political point, would not uphold the rule of law?
No, that's wrong. Sorry. What the Prime Minister has said is that we will not countenance any delay, and therefore, if we lose the vote, which would pave the way for the consequences, at that point, then what you'd effectively be doing, and what those who are going to have to vote on this would have to be countenancing, is giving control over the business of the House of Commons to a Jeremy Corbyn-led opposition, giving control of the negotiations in the way I described to a Jeremy Corbyn-led opposition. At that point, I think an election would be forced on the government because we'd have to sort this out.
OK, so just to clarify, you wouldn't reject the legislation then, as Michael Gove suggested. You would call an election to decide things, because they're two different things.
Mm-hmm.
I think the risk is that that will be forced on the government, because how could you actually operate if you don't control the business and you can't control
I get that. I get that. But again, just to clarify, you're not saying then that the government would reject parliamentary legislation. You're saying that that might trigger an election. I mean, they are two different things.
Yes, so we need to make a distinction between being willing to countenance the consequences of the legislation and, on the other hand, which I think was Susanna's point, would you behave lawfully? The government will always behave lawfully, of course.
So your belief is that if you lose this vote, which is probably going to be tomorrow, if you lose the vote, that the government may, as Boris Johnson's been briefing all the papers today, call a snap election as a response to that, which may be October the 14th. And is your belief in that eventuality that the positioning of the government being they're trying to, Parliament's trying to thwart what we want, which is to leave the European Union. It's trying to remove our best trump card in negotiation, which is no deal, and therefore we have no choice but to go to the country. Is it your belief in that eventuality of that election fought on that premise that you would win?
Well, we would be confident going in that we were trying to give effect to the will of the people, but it's not what we want. No one wants an election. We've set out a spending review, a Queen's speech. We've got this progress in the negotiations. We want to take the country forward. I think the point today is that the handbrake holding Britain back is this sense in Brussels that maybe if they just hold out a few days, a few weeks more, that this rebel alliance, this shenanigans in Parliament will see a debilitating delay, which will just weaken the UK's position, or possibly lead to a cancellation of Brexit, which would be effectively undermining the cardinal promise that all politicians made to respect the outcome of the referendum and at the last election to give effect to the referendum.
If we leave with no deal, and it turns out that the very worst case scenario actually happens,
as outlined in a government dossier.
I accept it's a complete hypothetical, but if it turns out the country is not prepared for no deal, and that the catastrophic predictions that some have been making, including members of government teams tasked with working this out, if the worst-case scenario happens, what would be the response of the government? Would you all fall on your swords? Would you accept that Brexit had failed? Would you all resign your posts?
Well, as you know, Piers, because I've been on before, I don't accept those Eeyore-ish pessimist assumptions. And indeed, don't just take my word for it. Look at Mervyn King, the former governor of the Bank of England, who this week has said this is ludicrous, these sort of apocalyptic scenarios. What we'll do is manage down the risks as best we can, but also grasp the opportunities. One thing Boris Johnson has done, which has been lost in this whole debate, is talk about the opportunities and the optimism, the hope that Brexit delivers, taking back control of our laws, a global player delivering on free trade deals, which are good for small businesses and the consumers. We're going to make it work. We've got a can-do spirit and optimism that we're going to get through this. And I think that's the crucial difference that the public has noticed about the new government under Boris Johnson's leadership.
You might want to have a word with the people in the Cabinet Office who don't share your optimism and produce this document, which was leaked to the Mail today. But Dominic Raab, thank you very much indeed, Foreign Secretary.
Thank you, as always.